lockdowns didn't do anything to keep people safer. The virus still spread. People still got sick. The most hardcore triple masking, stay home, only order your groceries, go outside in your front yard once a day to stretch. Those people still got sick, so it didn't do anything.
Hello and welcome to this interview with the podcast The Lotus Eaters. I'm Harry, today joined by Angela McArdle, the chair, I believe, of the Libertarian Party in the USA. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I was just speaking to Maj Toure, who I'm aware that you were affiliated with as part of the party. I think he's part of the party as well, and I had a very interesting discussion with him, so it's going to be great to talk to you as well. Just as a little primer, because over here in the UK, libertarianism is not as popular an ideology, I would say, as it is over in America. You guys have your tradition of liberty, the Gadsden flag, don't tread on me, all this sort of stuff. It's quite popular slogans over there, but over here, it's not that huge. So would you mind just explaining what the Libertarian Party is and what it represents and how you became affiliated with it?
Sure. So the Libertarian Party is obviously a political party that's really rooted in a philosophy of personal and economic liberty. We come from obviously a very revolutionary background over in the United States, and so we're really about having individualism be at the forefront of your political action and also cultural and like how you live your life in general. And we believe that political philosophy really flows out of what we call the non-aggression principle, which is that you go out and live your life peacefully as long as you're not causing physical harm to someone, to person or property, and you're not committing fraud. You can pretty much do what you want, and we would like to see the political process start to move in that direction as well.
Okay, just to get the foundations of that clear for everybody in that case. So the non-aggression principle, obviously I understand the natural law philosophy tradition that it comes from. Would you mind explaining that for the audience a little bit? How you came up, how the non-aggression principle was formulated and where it comes from?
So the non-aggression principle, I think, really comes from a long history of libertarian thought. I think it's probably mostly rooted in Lockean property rights. So John Locke was a philosopher who said, people should actually own their property. He was not down necessarily with the divine right of kings. And in the United States, American libertarianism really began to flourish, I would say, really in the late 60s, and then the party was finally established in 1971 by thought leaders like Murray Rothbard, who really pushed the non-aggression principle, and who were also economic thought leaders, economists as well, from the Austrian school of thought. And we have really, clung to that as a political institution because our political party, which is a little bit different, I think, than Republicans and Democrats, like we always come back to first principles. So that's sort of how we, came into possession of the non-aggression principle.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for explaining all that. So just to get into a little bit of the backstory, so you were part of the Mises Caucus, which was there was a bit of a divide in the Libertarian Party in the US, as far as I'm aware, between the more mainstream people who were the heads of the party up until just a few months ago and the Mises Caucus. Could you explain to us what the Mises Caucus was and why it was founded as part of the party?
Yes. So the Mises Caucus is a caucus within our political party, just like Republicans over here, they have like a Freedom Caucus, Democrats have a Progressive Caucus, and so on and so forth. So we're a caucus within the party, and we were all very inspired by the teachings of Ludwig von Mises, an Austrian economist that we're all really excited about. Most of us are big fans of the Mises Institute. So the caucus is separate, and there are four major things that we're very interested in. That's Austrian economics and economic literacy, reforming the Libertarian Party, and I'll explain why, single issue coalitions, which means we go and we find things that we can work together on outside of the party. So if it's drug decriminalization, trying to get cannabis legalized or decriminalize psychedelics, or it's opposing lockdowns, we'll go and we'll work with any group to do that. And local elections. We're very interested in localization. We believe that political action is strongest when it takes root in your community, when you get things kicked off at a grassroots level, because that's where you really get the best engagement and local buy-in. So we were started, let's see, I was active in the party in 2016 and 2017. So I was in the Libertarian Party before the caucus existed, but I joined pretty soon after it was founded, within a couple of months. And the party was founded sort of in response to this weird behavior that we saw coming out of leadership and some of the membership, where people seem to hate Ron Paul and reject things that we have classically associated with libertarianism, and instead sort of put a lot of progressive values on a pedestal within the party. And most of us just found that, well, obviously we didn't like it, but also weird. Like, literally, why would you do that? So we formed this caucus in a response to that, to get the Libertarian Party back on track and closer to its roots, its founding principles, from the founders like David Nolan.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds really weird to me. More than anything, just the whole, like, people within the party not liking Ron Paul. He seems like a really nice, likable guy every time I've seen him. So that seems very strange to me. And yeah, the whole idea of pushing the progressive woke agenda as part of the party does seem just completely disregarding the foundational principles of libertarianism, because, to be able to push progressive ideas, you're pushing statism, these sorts of ideas where you can't say these things about these people, you can't do these things in these certain ways. It all relies on state power, so that sounds very confusing. Do you have any examples of ways that it was pushing progressive agendas in such a way?
Sure. So most of the email campaigns that the party was sending out were written to appeal to people who are more on the left. There's sort of this idea that the only people who would vote libertarian who aren't already libertarians are free market Democrats. That's a whole nother can of worms. Interesting theory there. So you would see a lot of emails out about LGBT rights. Okay, we have always believed that gay people should be able to marry whoever they want, not a big deal. But why do we have such a disproportionate focus on that? We had no comment, not a single comment on lockdowns for a whole year. We had no comment on the rioting and looting of private businesses that was happening in the United States during the summers of 2020. But we certainly had a big commentary about the January 6th, quote unquote, insurrection. Do you see, like, our priorities are just totally out of whack, and that's the kind of thing that just didn't sit right with us. We should be defending small businesses and private property. Can we at least give it lip service? But it was like, oh no, we don't want to touch that because it would upset people. I'm thinking, who would it upset besides the people who are rioting and in support of riots? Those are not libertarians.
No, absolutely not. So obviously, it was only up until a few months ago that those of the, I think Rothbard referred to them as left and modal libertarians, were in charge of the party. Yeah. And then there was I believe it was referred to as the Reno takeover. Do you mind just walking us through a bit of that and what has changed about the party's priorities now as a result of it?
Sure. So every couple of years, we have a national convention, like every political party, and every single Mises candidate who ran was elected. Every single person who ran for a board position. So we are a Mises heavy, supermajority board now, which means that we're the people driving the train. We're in leadership. It took us close to 5 years to pull this off. But considering we're the third largest political party in the United States, that's not bad. It took some time, but that means that the people making financial decisions, the people making messaging decisions, the person doing hiring and firing, that's me, we have a say in the direction of the party now. We decide what the party does, what it focuses on, what it prioritizes, and the face of the party to the rest of the world.
Okay, and now that you're chair, What are the things that you're focusing on mainly?
Right. So first and foremost was repairing brand damage, because the Libertarian Party is so alienated from the liberty movement in the United States. That was just not right. So it's like you got to approach it with a certain sense of humility, right? Because you still have plenty of people who are kind of pissed off and say, "Oh, the party sucks." Okay, you've gotten in charge now, so we'll see. I'll sit back with my arms folded and see if you can change it. So we had to take a lot of feedback from the liberty movement to make the Libertarian Party get friendlier to it. So we've changed a lot of messaging on social media. There's been like a radical change on our Twitter. We are working to get brand cohesion throughout, the rest of our marketing materials. We've got a new communications director coming on board soon, so that's really exciting. Changing how we approach things like ballot access. As a political party, I still need to get my candidates on. Ballot access is important to me because that's how we get the message out. But we're going to start working a little bit smarter. There were so many sweet, well-meaning people in the party who they just didn't approach things with a fresh eye or strategically. So, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on lobbying necessarily than hitting the pavement to collect signatures and, burn everybody out. There's a lot of technical, kind of boring things that were really important to running the party's administration, and those things weren't handled well either. So it wasn't just messaging that was kind of ugly. We recently did some outreach to the Bitcoin community, for example, trying to expand our efforts and our reach into, markets that might actually agree with us on economics and people who might like us instead of hating us. So those are some things I've been working on.
Trying to appeal to people who don't hate you, that's quite a remarkable strategy you've got going there. I'm surprised they didn't think of that one earlier. And speaking of those people that you sorry if you can hear a siren in the background, it's Swindon, everything's always happening every day. But the people who you displaced from being the heads of the party, how did they feel about that, and what sort of pushback did you get? Because I know that Dave Smith, who's part of the caucus, as far as I'm aware, kind of did a YouTube live stream addressing the Reason TV article and short documentary that they released on it, which, without being overt, was trying to heavily imply certain negative things about the caucus.
Yeah, so, okay, a handful of people absolutely rage quit, dropped out of the party. All I can say for you is I'm sorry for your loss. You'll, hopefully you'll go on with your life and you'll be okay. But overwhelmingly, like the response has been pretty great. So I've gotten a little bit of hate mail. I get a little hate mail almost every day. That's okay.
Who doesn't?
Right. And the Reason interview was pretty weird. I have always considered Nick Gillespie my friend. But believe it or not, I have quite a few friends at Reason. It's split, and there's definitely a handful of reporters over there who hate my guts. But I wasn't really sure how to think about that video. I think my expectations, honestly, were so incredibly low that I was like, "Oh, okay, you didn't actually come out and call me a Nazi or a white supremacist. So thank you." That's really the reaction that I had. But I'm doing a roundtable interview with them at Freedom Fest later this week, right? So I must not be too much of the devil to them.
That's all right then. And just to assuade any sorts of comments that might be made, are you in fact a radical branch of Nazism that advocates for massive decentralization of state power?
I'm so unprepared. Usually I have a clown nose for when I answer this, and I say, no, I disavow bigotry and racism and Nazism. But no, it turns out that there's not a single Nazi in the Mises caucus. In fact, we have gay people in the caucus and minorities and women. What do you know? We're diverse.
That is rather shocking to hear, but very, very welcome to hear as well. So now that you guys have taken over, and now that we've got through that sort of, what are the results that you're seeing? Are you seeing some momentum start to pick up? Are you still in the position where everything's just getting going, or are you starting to see people respond more favourably to the Libertarian Party now that they seem to be something that is actually standing for something that isn't just Democrat or Republican light?
We're starting to gain momentum, and we're getting a lot of support. It's really great. People are excited about what we're doing. People who I thought nobody would know what's going on over here. People are reaching out. They're like, hey, I just want to tell you, I've been following. And I'm like, you have been? And they're like, I've been following. I think it's great. We're really excited about what you're doing. So it's been good. We're definitely just picking up too, in a way. I've been in this position now for about 6 weeks. We have our first like quarterly meeting coming up at the end of the month. And we're going to be poring over strategy documents and, all of that good stuff. So more exciting things are on the way.
Great to hear. And what do you think is so important about offering an alternative to the Democrat and Republican Party? Because so many people in America, and when we can see it over here, because even over here, people in England who have nothing to do with the American party system still profess a preference one way or the other for the Democrats or Republicans. What do you think is important about offering an alternative? And I know that it's supposed to be a radical alternative because Rothbard himself, I listened to a speech he made obviously before he died where he's talking about what should the Libertarian Party be? Should we be the party where we're just like, oh, we just want 2% tax reduction because then people are just going to go, well, you're no different.
Right.
Yeah. So what is it you guys are offering and why is it so important to offer something opposed to the two main parties you've got there?
We're the only party that really professes a strong belief in advocacy for individualism. And we're the only party that hasn't caved on economic issues. It was so awful to see in 2020 Donald Trump approve spending in just the trillions of dollars in bailout money and watch the entire country get locked down. And there were some Republican governors who, to their credit, a couple who didn't lock down at all, and then a couple who opened up pretty quickly. Like Florida, I think they were locked down for 3 months. People always forget that Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, he did lock people down initially. He just reversed quickly. It's better than nothing. So we're the only party that would just never do that. We would just never do it. We would never print trillions of dollars. We want to end the Fed. I think that the most moderate left-leaning people in the party that I don't agree with at least want to audit the Fed. So we're very different in that respect. And we're never going to compromise. We're never going to compromise on economics. It's just been so sad to see the Republican Party basically just chase after the Democrats and progressives and slowly adopt their ideas. They're very big on Social Security. There's a lot of economic things that we strongly disagree with them on.
Yeah, and on that basis, what would you, because I get this all the time when I talk about these sorts of things. What would you say to the sorts of people that would argue, for instance, that, oh, lockdowns were necessary because we didn't know, because obviously people's health is most important, and especially with the Fed, what would you say to those people? And I find the argument ridiculous, who are like, well, if we don't have the Fed constantly printing money, how is the economy going to grow? If we don't have the Fed bailing out these banks, then we're just going to live in a society that's completely unstable, where anything could happen at any time. It'll just turn into anarchy. How do you respond to those sorts of people? Because economics, I think people kind of overlook a lot of the time, despite the fact, generally speaking, on a day-to-day basis, as far as I'm concerned, it is the bedrock of how you go about your day. Because if you don't have enough money to afford to go eat, that kind of scuppers the rest of your plans you might have.
Yeah, lockdowns didn't do anything to keep people safer. The virus still spread. People still got sick. The most hardcore triple masking, stay home, only order your groceries, go outside in your front yard once a day to stretch. Those people still got sick, so it didn't do anything. What it did do was put tons of people out of business. We actually made a documentary about it in the Mises Caucus called The Unseen that aired at the Freedom Fest Film Festival last year, where we interviewed small business owners whose lives had been nearly ruined, and people who defied lockdowns. I personally know someone who had a heart attack and died because he was too afraid of the virus to go into the hospital. So people didn't get pacemaker surgery. So the unseen effects of it were really damaging. So I don't think that there's any way we can say that was the right call to make. And with the Federal Reserve printing trillions of dollars, our money it's lost like 90% of its value since the creation of the Fed. It hasn't stabilized things at all. It's just wreaked more and more havoc. Our interest rates were risen like 0.75%. It's the highest interest rate in many years. And what that means is that's the rate that banks lend to other banks, and it causes a ripple effect throughout the economy. So inflation is being reported in the United States at 8.6% now, but groceries are costing 10 to 20% more. Gasoline is through the roof. That's something where I'm sure that hearing Americans complain about gas prices, everybody else is kind of like, yeah, whatever, because our prices are so much lower. But there's a reason for that, like that's very important to us. That's a value that we have. And watching it just get knocked down, people can't afford to go to work. It's devastating. It has not been helpful. It's been very harmful.
Yeah, and don't worry, I understand that in comparison, I think over here, currently I'm driving a diesel car, so it's like £2 a litre, which John could probably do the maths, but it's probably something like $12 a gallon or something like that. It's absolutely horrendous over here. But over in America, you're a driving country, so I understand why it's such a big issue for a lot of people. You mentioned the unseen effects, and I assume with that, obviously, you guys are probably making reference to Frederick Bastiat's "What is Seen and Unseen."
Yes.
And for people who would be interested in learning more about the economics and philosophy that underpins this, what sort of thinkers would you recommend? So obviously we've got Mises. I mean, he's who the caucus is named after. Bastiat would be another one. Rothbard as well. What other people would you recommend? And which ones inspired you in particular to become more libertarian and get involved in all of this?
Well, there's also Hayek. I think that if you want to get a really good primer, I would tell someone to read Ron Paul's book Liberty Defined, because that is geared more towards the layman. It's topical. You can flip through and pick any chapter on any topic. There'll be a few pages long, and you'll get a really good idea of what the libertarian position is. Rothbard's Anatomy of the State, also a really good short primer on the dangers of government. Much easier to digest than Man, Economy, and State, which is like, I don't know, 800 pages long or something.
It's bigger than that. It's like over 1,000 pages, yeah. Especially if you get it with Power and Market. It's a ridiculous tome.
Yeah, so those are the books I would recommend. If you're very interested in like the economic effects of things that happen in the United States with banking, Tom Woods also wrote a really good book called Meltdown. I recommend that one. Those are some books that really helped me to kind of figure things out. My red pill moment with libertarianism, I had always considered myself a libertarian since I was a teenager, but when I really got it and I had like a major paradigm shift was when I read G. Edward Griffith's The Creature from Jekyll Island. And that book is like very focused on central banking. Some people think it's a little conspiratorial, but it talks about the origins of the Federal Reserve. And that was what really woke me up and helped me realize like we have a real problem with central planning in the United States. It is a threat against my existence.
That's very interesting. I don't think I've heard of The Creature on Jekyll Island, so no, I haven't. I'll have to check that one out myself. So thank you very much for the suggestion there. I'll take that one on myself. But one of the things that obviously I can tell that you're already addressing now that the Mises caucus has taken over. But one of the things that I encounter a lot, and I'm sure that you do as well, and Rothbard and Rockwell in particular, and Hopper as well, really focuses on this quite a lot, is that sadly, libertarianism has quite a negative public perception, both in the mainstream because of the radical free market economics, but also in more like right-wing establishment types, primarily because lots of people see libertarians as hedonists. They see people
Yes.
they see it as the types of people who are trying to find free market excuses for their degenerate lifestyles. How are you guys planning on combating that, if you are planning on combating it?
Absolutely. And the onus is on us to repair our own reputation. Like that's something that we have to take responsibility for. So part of that is that the history of the Libertarian Party in the United States is strongly associated with atheism, because most of the prominent thinkers, not all, but most of the people who put the party together were atheists. So you didn't see a large influx of Christian people in the party early on. I think that Ron Paul helped to change that and sort of reform the party's image to a certain extent. So what we really have to do is make it very clear that the party is open and welcoming to people who are more socially conservative. Like if it's not manifesting in policies and you're not trying to pass, theocratic laws, you're welcome in the party. It doesn't matter how socially conservative you are. This is about economics and individualism. Yeah, that's really on us. And as far as people who think that we're just like very selfish and we don't care about anyone else, because that's sort of the other side of the coin, is we have to demonstrate that we understand the value of community, and that socialism that's enforced through the state is not charity. That's not a charitable action. Taking someone's tax dollars under the threat of imprisonment to give someone else a free home is just not as sweet and generous and kind as people would like to make it sound.
No, absolutely not. And I find that when you start to examine it, you start to see that things like the welfare state, the sorts of redistributive wealth, tax redistribution that you see going on, especially in the United States and over in the UK, I would say is more destructive than anything
Yeah.
of community. So I don't get how people can argue that the state the state caused this problem. Oh, Thomas Sowell, we just need more of the state to solve this problem. No, that's not what's going to work with it. And on that basis, what kind of, I think you've already mentioned it a little bit, but what kind of voters are you looking to attract? Are you looking to send out the big tent message that I think the Republicans were going for a little bit? Or are you being more specific?
We need to be more specific in our approach. We need to really laser in on different demographics. Well, the first thing we need to do is an actual market research study. So that's going to happen. So we get pushback because there was some Pew Research study put out a while ago that said we should market to free market Democrats because those are the people most aligned with our views. But I would push back and say that whoever did that study, it was just an off-the-shelf study. They didn't understand us. They didn't understand our message. So things like that happen, and creates chaos in the, what does Michael Malice call them, the midwit population, people who think they're very intelligent because they can look something up on Wikipedia. Ideally, we want to reach out to people who are liberty-minded conservatives. So that's people who care more about personal liberty than being on the red team, who have totally, embrace Donald Trump and would rather just go down with him in flames than look at any other option. And on the left, the people that we are really interested in appealing to are people who I call the heretical left. So let's say you've always been a Democrat, your friends are progressive, but you didn't like lockdowns. And you still support free speech. You don't understand what's up with the pronoun police and everybody tone policing you, and you're just not about that. So people who are a little bit more like Bill Maher, for example, those are people on the left that we would want to reach out to.
Okay, very interesting. And going on to more specific policy sorts of positions now. So we've already mentioned inflation and that there's a diversity of opinion, but even the most moderate want to audit the Fed. So what would be the libertarian solution to inflation? And obviously, I know that you would include ending the Fed there. Do you mind just explaining for those who probably a bit more layman regarding this, why it is that the Fed is so damaging, why it is these gigantic state apparatus are so damaging to people's prosperity and just ability to make a day-to-day living?
Okay, so let's look at maybe just the printing of currency for the first example. When you print more dollars, your dollars become worth less. They're not as much they're not as valuable. So we want you to be able to actually, I don't know, keep money in a savings account if you so choose, and have that money not go down in value in 5 years. And that has not been the case. So it's really, inflation is a regressive tax. It really hurts poor people the most, people who can't afford to invest in property and pay someone to help them navigate the financial system and show them where to invest. Like if you just have a savings account right now, you're financially screwed. So that's not a good thing. We also, central planning, man. When someone else is deciding how your dollars are going to be spent and deciding and dictating what a bank has to set an interest rate for, and putting up hurdle after hurdle for small business. And we've seen that happen with with giant regulatory frameworks that come into place to quote unquote save us. That's not a good thing. These are the people who also want to normalize bailing out banks, who want to tell banks this was something that was terrible that happened in the 2008 financial collapse and leading up to it, to force banks to lend to people who they know can't afford to repay the loan, and to encourage things like variable interest rates. So you sign up to buy a home and you're like, I've only got $5,000 to put down. Any smart, normal, and sane investor would say you don't have enough money. This is a bad idea. But the Federal Reserve really encouraged people that no. You gotta lend those people money, give them a mortgage, just make the interest rate variable. And then later on, when financial markets start to tank, they say, oh, okay, so instead of your loan repayment being $1,200 a month, it's going to go up to $5,000, and then people lose their homes. It's just, you can't account for everything. And the Federal Reserve and central planning, they try to just line everything up in the future like it's a game board, and they have like control, and they don't. Everything just, there's always going to be some unseen side effect that pops up. And that's one of the reasons that we just really oppose central planning of money.
Okay. And obviously inflation is probably the biggest issue on people's mind right now, but I'd say coming up in a very close second place, especially in places like Florida. We've mentioned DeSantis. He did manage to, like you say, it's better than nothing. He managed to end the lockdowns after about 3 months, and he is becoming very, very popular, to the point where I think Dave Smith said that if they had a candidate running in Florida against Ron DeSantis, there's no point. There's no point, because Ron DeSantis is just so popular there. There wouldn't be much of a point. And plus, he is trying in his way to preserve freedom for the people there. But he's also become very popular because of his fighting against progressive cultural issues, in particular the teaching of sex education to kids who are far too young for it, to try and teach gender ideology to these people. And how would you guys say that you're planning on tackling cultural issues? Because, I believe in freedom, decentralization. There are those who would make the argument that this kind of approach is just giving a free pass to those whose cultural ideas are damaging to society. I'm more of a Hoppian, so I'm not entirely against his suggestion of just people who are like that. As long as it's my private property, just get off. Yeah. Get away from here. Because it gets to the point where 20 years ago it was just, we want gay people to get married. All of a sudden it's, our kids can be trans, which just is absurd to me how quickly that's sort of like slid down the slippery slope. So how can libertarianism help with these problems? And do you guys have a particular position within the party on these sorts of issues that are affecting a lot of people?
So cultural engagement and cultural awareness are two things that the Libertarian Party historically has just not had. And within the Mises Caucus, we're very committed to engaging in the culture and trying to foster a culture of libertarianism and individualism. And, that comes with like literacy of the philosophy, educating people. Cultural awareness. So we're not going to, here's a good example. We're not going to aggressively lobby and campaign to make Drag Queen Story Hour illegal in every place in the United States. But it's also okay for us to normalize saying, that's a bad idea, and here's why. And that should not be something that we see manifesting in the Libertarian Party. And that sort of attitude, just that alone, is not something that you would have seen in the Libertarian Party 6 months ago. People were very afraid, hands off. I would definitely support any campaign to limit taxpayer dollars, or just completely, eliminate taxpayer dollars going to policies that are like that. This is a big problem with public schools, though. Academia is controlled by the far left. And so what we recommend is that people pull their kids out of public schools that are indoctrinating them this way. That's where the teachers and school counselors are giving kids hormones and changing their gender when they're at school without telling their parents. It's not a good thing. But it's another effect. It's a side effect of central planning. And when you get just too cozy with the government, like they start to raise your children for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you're aware of him, but one of the few more higher profile libertarians, I think he's an anarcho-capitalist even, that we have over here in the UK is a man called Dominic Frisby. Are you aware of Dominic?
Yes.
Yes. When I spoke to him, he was very, very down with homeschooling. He wanted to tell
Yeah.
everybody about the benefits of that, and about how, you are getting your kids out of the hands of the state. What sort of what argument on behalf of homeschooling would you put forward?
Oh, well, public school is one of the most violent places your child might ever go. It's the place where they're most likely to encounter violence at the hands of another student, at the hands of another teacher. Sexual abuse rates are actually fairly high in public school. I know the Catholic Church gets a lot of grief. Public school is up there way past them. They're built like prisons to keep your child in. It's not suitable learning environment for a small child, especially young boys. They always get called hyperactive. It's just totally natural for a 7-year-old boy to want to run all over the place because he has lots of energy. Homeschooling gets rid of all of those problems. And it also reinstills a much stronger sense of family identity, which I think is healthy. And it keeps you away from, bad environments. Like your parents can choose what you're exposed to, and they can also allow your homeschooling allows your child to learn at a much faster pace and to be more engaged with their curriculum. I just think it's so much better. There's no drag queen story hour at home unless your parents are demented and they want to do that. Hopefully they don't, but there's no drag queen story hour. There's no progressive propaganda. There's no teaching children that they were born inherently evil because of their race or that they're going to grow up to be oppressors. Like that is all removed once you just keep your child in the home.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And kind of on the opposite tact of that, I think you've mentioned that you've got gay members of the caucus, gay members of the party. All you've rubbed shoulders with Maj Toure, who I've spoken to, and I think Zuby spoke with you guys as well.
Mm-hmm.
We've spoken with Zuby. There's all of these people. You could even describe the party as diverse in a way, even though I think that that's not the overriding goal of what you're going for. You've just found people who are like-minded, who come from different backgrounds. One of the most contentious, if you're trying to attract people from the left in particular, policy positions that I've seen and that I agree with, but is the repealing of anti-discrimination laws that you guys have, saying that it's perfectly fine if a business doesn't want to serve this person because of this characteristic. It's perfectly fine if a church, for instance, doesn't want to go along with this gay marriage because that's not what the church believes in. What are the reasons for the wanting to repeal these laws, and why do you think that is necessary for a free society?
Well, they were certainly passed with the best of intentions. And like a lot of other laws that are passed with good intentions, they end up with damaging results. And that's what we've seen. Affirmative action policies are not helpful. They disincentivize people to work based on merit and to work hard and to get into a school. We don't like, racial discrimination. But I would rather know maybe if a restaurant feels that way, if a business feels that way, than not. And I would let the market kind of decide. And you've sort of seen this happen with cancel culture, although to the extreme, unhealthy end of things. If anybody gets out of turn, or does anything they're not supposed to do, they get crucified on social media. We have something called Yelp. Your Yelp reviews online will just tank, 5-star to 1-star. Well, we've seen so many things happen in academia where good students get pushed out because of affirmative action puts other people up and forces them into school. You've also seen minority students suffer because they get pushed in, not based on merit, but based on race, and then they don't do as well academically. That's certainly not all minorities, but affirmative action allows things like that to happen. And then on the tyrannical end of things, you see that really what it does is it supports state-sponsored racism. And now we have legislators, especially in California, who try to make crazy laws it's just so unhealthy. There are so many unhealthy attitudes that come out of affirmative action and treating people basically based on race. instead of their individual characteristics and merit. I can't think of one off the top of my head right now, but our governor in California, Gavin Newsom, and his legislature have proposed a lot of over the top affirmative action style laws. One of them was thankfully voted down in our last election, which was that businesses do have a right to discriminate. It was almost like a reversal, encouraging businesses to elevate people of minority status in hiring and academic admissions. That was started though in affirmative action. It's like this weird horseshoe thing that happens.
And on a similar subject as well, one of the other big things. On all of that, I think I read the other day. I forget who the quote was from exactly, but it was somebody, a black man in the 1960s, referring to all of the civil rights legislation and the affirmative action that was put in place because of that. Because I don't think anybody really has anything wrong with the idea of repealing these laws forcing people to segregate, but then it's all of the affirmative action that goes on top of it.
Right.
I forget exactly who the person was, but they said something along the lines of, "Why would I want to work for a white man who hates me, and the only thing forcing him to be nice to me is the government?" You know, at the end of the day, I always think that that's going to end up in, at the very least, a hostile work environment for people.
It is, and it is, and a lot of us have worked at places like that, and like racism. And I'm going to trigger everyone in the United States. It's not that big of an issue anymore, except for the progressive reactionaries. But you do occasionally run into some old man who's racist, and it's just like no one wants to be around him. So if he's a restaurant owner, and then you have Latino people working in the kitchen, and he's like muttering things under his breath, it's just not a good environment. Like just let those people go their own way. Let them ride off into the sunset. They're not a popular demographic anymore. Just let it die out.
Yeah, I also see it with the more radical wing of the whole critical race theory movement that's going on. They're like the black nationalists. And at the end of the day, for me, it's like, well, if you guys are so desperate to not have to live with white people, then why should there be laws forcing you to have to interact with white people every day and not discriminate against them, even though that's so obviously what you want to do? Because at the end of the day, racism can cut both ways. People can be racist against you or I, and I don't see anything productive in forcing people to have to interact with those that they hate on a daily basis. I mean, I thought the whole point of society is for conflict resolution, whereas that's just brewing conflict, as far as I'm concerned. And speaking of things that brew conflict, one of the other big issues going on, I know it's big in America, but especially in the UK, where it's one of the things that is most pressing on our minds here at the Lotus Eaters, is immigration, because lots of people as well have ideas of libertarians being open borders types. You know, Rothbard was, and then towards the latter days, and when he became more of a polemicist and got involved with John Randolph Club and spoke to Pat Buchanan and stuff, he changed tune on that a lot. And Hopper especially as well is not an open borders type. He's, you know, the private property anarchy in his mind, you know, no one would be able to go anywhere where they're not allowed to. But people do have this perception of libertarians as being open borders, and I think in the UK especially we can see the negative effects that have come about, not because of open borders per se, but because of massively uncontrolled, rampant immigration, where we've got, I think last year we had 1 million people come into the country. And there are parts of England that no longer resemble England. There are parts of our culture that have changed for the negative ways. Because of affirmative action policies and the sorts of stigma that is put on people who are perceived as racist, the police don't follow up on particular cases because of the race of the people involved. Does the Libertarian Party right now have a position on borders, or is that something that you're going to address later on?
So the platform position right now leans open borders. It's not explicitly open borders. It leans that way. In the Mises Caucus, we don't take an official stance on immigration because we want people who are more open borders and who just want like immigration reform or even some version of closed borders. Like if you're libertarian and you can make a libertarian case for it, we believe that you belong in the party. And within the caucus, I think that You definitely do have some open borders people. I think a majority of us are more focused on like Hoppian style private borders, and that's what we advocate for. And there is a good chance that you will see our official party position on immigration change in the future. I don't think you're going to see it swing to like an aggressive closed borders position, but we might treat it like abortion, where we just don't take a strong stance on it either way so that we can allow different thought on the party to feel more welcome. Because, so this is an interesting thing, right? Within the Libertarian Party, you have plenty of people who believe in Ellis Island style immigration. What that means is, like in the beginning of the United States, you come in through Ellis Island, you basically get checked, you don't have any horrible diseases, you're not a serial killer, you're not wanted in another country, come on in. That seems like very much like it is part of the American dream. There were people in the party who thought that was an evil, racist, bigoted immigration stance. I just think that's absurd. This is not, if we're going to have to operate within the framework of government, I think it's reasonable for there to be like a simple safety check, like literally someone with a clipboard. I don't think that that's part of some evil, racist, fascist agenda. So we want to normalize that, right? And for those of us who lean more open borders in the caucus, most of the people who are more open borders will say things like, yeah, I would love the border to be open after we end the drug war and the war in the Middle East, so people aren't as incentivized to come here and want to do harm to us. We need to, again, in the past, that was, oh my gosh, I can't believe, what a closed border racist you are. And like, no, I'm just trying to provide an actual solution or common sense. So that's kind of the direction that I see the party going in the future, is to start actually thinking more critically about the position we take on borders and be open.
Okay, that's all very interesting. And you mentioned there ending the drug war, and I'm going to assume that your position is going to be basically Ron Paul's position on this. Can you explain to us why you would be seeking to decriminalize drugs?
Yeah, so we think that the drug war has failed, that it has torn apart a lot of families, especially inner city families. Some of those areas are more heavily policed than white suburban areas. And and there's different reasons for that. Crime rates are going to make people more subject to stop and frisk policies and so on and so forth. But it's just been a failure. Like, drug addiction is a terrible thing. We certainly aren't going to encourage people to go out and shoot up heroin or do crack if it's decriminalized. But we do think that making it illegal forces it into the black market. It increases violent crime. It increases cartel crime, and incentivizes people to smuggle drugs across the border, to do things that are dangerous, to have your heroin cut with fentanyl that kills people. It's actually killed a couple of people I've known. And if it was decriminalized, then people could get their drugs tested, be a little bit safer. You could, rehabilitation facilities would be more affordable. People would go to jail less. One mistake, that's all it takes early in life. One mistake with drugs, and you end up incarcerated and you become a product of the system. You can't get a real job because you have a criminal record, and you become someone who is essentially institutionalized, and you are in and out of the revolving door of the criminal justice system, and your life is ruined. And we would like to not see that happen. We recognize there are always going to be people who have drug addiction. There are always going to be people who are homeless, who make bad choices. We don't recommend it, but we just don't think that government incarceration is the answer to that problem.
Yeah, of course. And just to clear it up for anybody who might be confused, is decriminalizing something the same as morally endorsing it?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, and this is how I feel about sex work too. Like, we don't think that prostitution should be illegal. I'm not going to be waving a flag endorsing it as a healthy lifestyle or something that you should engage in.
Good to know. And on the basis, going back a bit more to immigration, one of the things that encourages a lot of people to come over here is the fact that we have such an incredibly lax welfare policy. People can just come over here and basically get through the borders, and immediately the government will house them in a hotel paid for with our tax money. They will get benefits. They will be able to just sit around getting paid for. And that is one of the big things that encourages people to come over here and basically live off of my dime, to use an American phrase there. What would your position on the welfare state be? Would it be more the Austrian Rothbardian style, or would it be more the improved efficiency, oh my goodness, how have I forgotten? Chicago, Friedman style.
Yeah, Friedman style. Definitely Austro-Rothbardian. I mean, I think that the welfare state is incredibly damaging. I've seen its effects firsthand. I used to spend a lot of time volunteering with the homeless population in Skid Row, which is notorious. Skid Row is one of the worst areas in the country. It is part of downtown Los Angeles, and it is basically an open air asylum. A lot of homeless people down there flock in droves from all over the country to Skid Row because that's where you can get the most social services and benefits. So people who come into the United States, it's not quite like it is in England. You don't get just a ton of free welfare. There are ways to game the system, absolutely. But in California, you can, because different states have different policies. And in California, we have a turn the blind eye to immigration type policy officially in a handful of states or cities. San Francisco is a sanctuary city. The city of LA is a sanctuary city. That means our law enforcement has officially come out and said, we don't cooperate with immigration on raids. You can do what you want to do. From a libertarian peaceful perspective, that's great. From a libertarian economic perspective, it's not so great because these people, a lot of them get free welfare. I think the best thing to do is to just repeal as many of those policies as possible. Just cut them. Social Security is a big mess. It's a Ponzi scheme. I don't know if the right thing to do would be to pull the rug out from under everyone immediately. But, give them 6 months, 5 years, whatever. Start the countdown. Policies are going to end. And a big part of that also is the regulatory framework that makes it so difficult to get into like a mutual aid society, to have affordable insurance. I never knew when I was in my early 20s that you could get private disability insurance. I didn't learn about that until I was like 30 years old. So I was like, wow, I kind of missed the window. There are all these opportunities you have where you're not going to need state dependence, but they're all suppressed because of the government. Because they're in competition with you, right? Like they want you to get on the dole.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK especially, I mean, there's about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, it used to be like front page news every single day that some journalist will have uncovered some woman who's managed to, by the age of 25, pop out 12 children somehow and is getting paid £500,000 a month or something ridiculous from the government just for the sake of childcare. Whereas, obviously I don't see that as being a particularly good environment for those children, because I know people specifically who my fiance, somebody in people in her family were basically just there, born so that the parents could collect the welfare for it, and it's really not good for them because they know that as well, and it really plays on their minds that I was not a wanted child. So that I think as well as all this, there's just some really bad sociological effects and psychological effects that it can have on people to go through that sort of thing. But anyway, moving on. I don't want to take up too much of your time. We've almost been going for an hour now. I'll just ask. So now that we've gone through all this, what are the big plans for the future? What are you thinking about in terms of presidential candidates? What are you thinking about in terms of real ways to start to keep the forward momentum going? You said things have been picking up a bit. I know he's floated the idea. Would you be putting Dave Smith forward for president? That would be an interesting candidate.
He is the front runner right now. So with the caveat, he hasn't officially declared, but the people that we suspect will run or be the serious contenders in the race are Dave Smith, Justin Amash, and Spike Cohen, possibly our former vice presidential candidate. And, personally, I'd like to see Dave Smith in. I'll support whoever the party ends up nominating, but I'm definitely in the Dave Smith camp right now.
And why is it that you prefer him over the other candidates? Not to get too personal, because they might
Yeah,
watch
yeah.
this.
Okay, so let's think about this. Well, Spike is a close second. I would say, and I would still support Justin Amash, even though he swipes at me on social media.
Oh, really?
Watching you. I think that Dave is really educational without being too informational. And Justin Amash is very informational and less educational. So Dave Smith is a really good communicator, and I think that that's very important. And right now, it's not likely, very unlikely, that the Libertarian presidential candidate is going to actually win the presidential race. That's okay. Let's all come to terms with that, and be grounded in reality. So the purpose of it should really be a strong messaging campaign and to get people enthused about libertarianism and inspire them to take action locally. So go, hear Dave Smith talk, get excited, to vote for him, help us start to make more electoral gains, and then go get activated in your community, run for city council, and get rid of some stupid laws. Or if you have some insane tyrannical governor, maybe your city or county can basically nullify or disregard those laws. That's happened in California. It's the power that local municipalities have to defy dictatorial governors has really shown through during the times of lockdowns and mandates. It was really incredible. So that's what I want the presidential campaign to do for us. And I think that Dave is just the best messenger for the job. I think Spike is really good too. But I think Dave's reach is a little bit better, and I think he just hits really hard.
Yeah, Dave's background being a podcast host and comedian obviously has a lot to do with his communication skills. But I think if there's one lesson we can all learn from Trump is that people respond to strong messaging and also somebody who is just funny. So, I disagree with a lot of stuff that Trump did, but there's no denying that the man is very entertaining to watch. Even
Hilarious.
people who are diehard, vote blue no matter who, Democrats, I've seen, will occasionally admit, okay, Trump said something here that was pretty funny, okay? He was entertaining. The amount of people after Biden who came in, who I saw on Twitter, I do miss Trump's Twitter feed, though.
Totally.
So
it was hilarious. And it really, he broke the mold in the United States because he made the president accessible for the first time. He's on Twitter all day long. It's not his campaign staff, it's him. You're actually seeing these are his thoughts. He's retweeting memes. It made it more human, I think. It really humanized and made it feel okay, you can come in and you can become the president without being an accepted establishment candidate. So I really appreciate that about his race.
Yeah, and I think Dave having probably at this point, thousands of hours of podcast content available online to anyone who goes looking for it probably does a lot to humanize him in the eyes of voters as well. It's we don't know who Hillary Clinton really is behind closed doors. We don't know, we're learning a lot more about who Joe Biden and Hunter Biden are behind closed doors as the days go by, but still we don't really know what these people are like, whereas Dave seems much more approachable, and I think that's the kind of candidate that you want to be putting forward, somebody who you could reasonably sit down and have a conversation with.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Sorry?
That's kind of what people thought about Barack Obama. Now, I was not a fan, but people they thought he was a relatable human being. So I think it is important to get a relatable human being up in front of the public.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody who isn't just obviously failing to read a teleprompter, for instance. Somebody who can be entertaining on the fly. But with that, I think we've been going on for a while. Thank you so much. Do you have any closing remarks, closing statements, anything you really want to tell anybody who's watching this to try and convince them that there is something outside of the two-party system? There is extra choices, and even if you don't get the presidency this time, then we can still move forwards towards a movement that can achieve things in the future.
Yeah, you got to break out of the two-party paradigm. There's so much more philosophically and ideologically out there in the world, and if you really care about individualism, if you really care about individual rights, You just have to have that ego death moment and understand that Republicans and Democrats are not ultimately there to serve the needs of the individual. They're there to serve their own interest. And I just encourage everybody to just slowly let go of that paradigm and embrace personal freedom.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very, very much for your time, Angela. To everybody watching, this has been Angela McArdle, chair of the Libertarian Party, talking about why you should consider maybe getting outside of that two-party system. Thank you so, so much for all of this, Angela, and taking the time out of your day to do this interview. Have a great time, everyone.
Thanks for having me.